Welcome, folks, to the Squeaky Wheel. This is podcast number 5. My name is Ross Memphis Pambrun. I'm the CEO of the Memphis Group. I am an active participant in our community. The reason I am the captain is because I do work as a professional fire officer. My employer happens to be the city of Calgary, and with me today on the Squeaky Wheel, as always, and I couldn't do this without him, my wonderful co-host, the president, Lawrence Gervais. Lawrence, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Lawrence Gervais, as Ross Pambrun had said, or Captain Pambrun, and I am the regional president for the Métis Nation of Alberta.
Now, Lawrence, I'm going to take the viewers and the people who are just listening online through a little bit about our format. So, folks, we're going to talk just a little bit about coffee and something that's important to me and to us in our local region. We are going to talk about some current issues. We're going to have some Métis connections that involves our community and education. Today we're not going to be connecting with any guests, but we are going to continue our conversations as we always do about the things that are happening within our community. We're going to talk about what to expect on our future broadcasts, and we're going to rant a little bit. That's just sort of the way that Lawrence and I get things sorted out. So our roaster today, Lawrence, is analog. Now you might see that I see you're using something new. That looks very much like Star Wars.
It's Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi.
So the 3 most important ones.
And then when I drink the cup, you can see the Star Wars label.
I'm using a mug from Germany that's made from a little place in Zell, very close to where I was born. And as we've talked about before, the reason I was over there was because my dad was in the military. He's an Aboriginal veteran. Thank you to all of our soldiers. Thanks to our listeners. Thank you to all the people and our subscribers who send in questions for us and suggestions we might have. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So this coffee is analog. This is the, I sent over, it was the Godfather Espresso. So it's a little bit heavier. The bean wasn't nearly as dark than I was anticipating. It's actually quite a light bean, but the roast is delicious. They have probably about 7 locations in Calgary, as well as where they release their beans. But this one was picked up from the farmers market on Blackfoot, which is open, is available. And folks, they still practice physical distancing. So please make sure that you are conscious about that, because we are going to talk about that today. And one of the points that I missed out on was that I was a registered nurse before, and I know we've hit on that on previous podcasts, and we're going to talk about a few of those things today. Now, Lawrence, for the listeners who don't get a chance to visually see, what's going on in there behind you? I see your Martin guitar. Looks like it's should be played a little bit more. I know that that's that picture of Louis Riel. I can see the picture of you from your time in the Alberta Ballet.
Cool. That was my school show. Yeah.
Oh, that was the school. Okay, I apologize. That was in the school. And there's your Métis flag. Oh, which reminds me, I meant to put my Métis flag a little more prominent. What's that above your school photo?
Well, you can't see it on the camera, but it's actually my oath of office right there.
Ah, okay. Tell us a little bit more about that.
What it is?
You've been in now since 2014?
I was the regional vice president before I became regional president, which is kind of a natural succession, for a lot of leaders. You move to this. I mean, I moved from youth council to a program coordinator to an executive director, all the way up to vice president to president. So I've moved up the channel. And we kind of take the oath kind of, it's more of a serious thing, because it actually, sort of ascertains how we sort of lead throughout our terms. And, it's a promise to ourselves, to our family, to the nation, to a lot of things. So
it's you can refer back to this. I think a lot of politicians should probably refer back to this every now and then, as they're taking their oath, not sometimes for the direction that they always want to take, but what the populace, what the members, what the citizens, the direction they support.
Yeah.
So does that reflect on that? That makes sure that you don't forget that you are meeting the needs of those people?
Yeah, I mean, it's important because it shows who your integrity, who your pureness to, and usually at a ceremony, it's done in front of all your peers. So this one currently was my regional vice president oath. The president one I have at the office, but this one is here at home, and this one is signed by your father, who's
That's right.
a veteran, but he was there to witness it, and we kind of it's a very formal invite, and it's a very fantastic ceremony because it allows us to actually breathe in why we doing this job right
I
at the
know
beginning.
George was pretty proud when you invited him to be a signatory on that. He often comments on that, and thank you again for always reaching out to him.
Yeah, one day we can. I think that's important too. To see what a Métis veteran, well, a retired sergeant major who's a very high ranking officer.
I
To
do know he would be keen to share some of that conversation. And just like in all organizations, there's challenges, I think, within their organization of the participation, the activities, and keeping people involved. And I think he's become the ripe old age of 78. And with his 33 years in the military, I'm pretty sure he has a few things he'd like to comment on. So we'll have to be cautious, and we'll be able to prep him before we bring him onto our show. But I foresee him coming on sooner than later. Now, folks, for all of you who are just listening in and are not watching on video, just to take you through a little bit, we talk about coffee, places that are local and current to us, and shout outs to them. And thank you for all of those groups for continuing to support our communities. We're happy to buy our coffee on from your locations, and we always recommend if there's somebody out there that has a new product that you'd like us to talk about. It's important that we reach out to those groups. We talk about current issues, and I can't remember if I made a point that I know we've talked about this before, that I'm a registered nurse, and it may look a little bit messy here behind me, but that's a few things, Lawrence, that I wanted to talk about today. And we don't have a guest on today because I think we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the connections, the Métis connections. And I know you have a few things you'd like to talk about, including the how we're going to approach Stampede and the things that are coming up. We're going to talk a little bit about youth. We're going to always talk about different ways that you can connect with us, and then maybe a little bit of what our broadcast was. Just to touch up on, I'd like to say thank you again to Mr. The local president, Joe Pimlott, who has a very proud new role within our community as the local president for Local 87 for this one of the 6 locals within this region. We talked about some of the challenges that are being faced by the events that are occurring last week. We ranted about, well, my rant was just that I think businesses need to do a more active job in ensuring that they have direction for all of the people who are showing up within their business in order to take advantage of everything that the store has available. And we talked about, I think, a little bit about family. So one of the things, Lawrence, that I wanted to talk about today was what's happening further. We're starting to see a bit of a resurgence with COVID. And I know, folks, that this is not an easy cop out conversation. This is still one of the most important conversations we still have to have. And I think we need to have this conversation as long as the wonderful Dina Hinshaw continues to remind us we have to have this conversation. So, what are some of the new programs that we're starting to see here when we talk about our podcast number 5?
I think that we're moving into a direction of, the people who've been affected by loss of income. So, how do we get to those people? Because it will take a lot of time for them to actually regain some sort of sanity, at least with within their homes and their well-being. So, we look at mental health as another way of programs that are probably going to be popping up in the future, but also employment, education, training, those areas. Like we have Rupert Institute that does a very good job on actually uh, gaining some of that ground. but we know that there's going to be a large influx after the CRB sort of stops for people. That's what we're kind of preparing for in the future. So
In the CRB, that's a confusing one because they just keep talking about doing extensions, but I'm starting to see that there's different provinces that are offering to pay people to come back to work. I try to read to get a better understanding of what's happening federally regarding how they make their determination regarding that program. Still a little bit confused. I think it's still important that we are providing some allowance for definitely students, for those individuals who the economy hasn't kicked back into. It's challenging. It's very difficult.
yeah,
And COVID is still kicking us all while we're down. I mean, the mosquitoes are biting us while we're down, but I guess I'm sure that's happening all across Canada just in case this crazy weather. The, to talk about a little bit of connections, is it all right if I just interject a little bit regarding in COVID? Because one of the current issues that really is a good reminder, and we're starting to see it. Everybody to me is excited about hockey, and I'm going to rant about that a little bit later. But I'm excited. It sounds like Vancouver may not necessarily be one of the hubs that they're looking at anymore. Now, this is just a little bit of hearsay, but it still looks like Edmonton is on the list. Edmonton's starting to see a bit of a resurgence of COVID cases. And I know the NHL is looking into a few things, but it's going to be challenging. But one of the other things I don't know if you're reading about in the news was Novak Djokovic, who could be one of my more favorite tennis players, along with Roger Federer. But he's Serbian, and there's tournaments that he's hosting and charitable tournaments, and they were talking about how important it is that they follow the rules. Well, here he is hugging people at after matches. The different players are, celebrating. Then there's pictures of him celebrating at dance nightclubs, no protection. And guess who has COVID? A whole bunch of those tennis players, his wife, those groups. Now there's a question of they're suggesting, well, maybe the government's a little bit kind of, should be take a little bit of the blame. I think some of the blame still has to fall on those individuals who aren't willing to do their due diligence.
no, I agree with that. I mean, if you know that this is around and it can affect your sport, you at least have a responsibility, and to really take it lightly. It all goes back to even that NB player that was touching all the mics and touching everybody's
Yeah, yeah.
the very beginning of this. To have this long of 3 months and then you're on the same path as that person, it just boggles the mind. Yeah.
It's funny, you're right, because at that time, that was sort of one of the precursors, that NBA player who was sort of joking and laughing it off. And he was probably one of the first most prominent sports figures. And he really accepted, he did accept and apologized and was aware of his mistake. And you would think that that would translate and that other sports athletes would go, I don't want to. I mean, I understand that they want to open their economy and I understand that they want to play their sport, but I also think that they, as sort of the leaders within the sports communities and people that all of our youth look up to, or people who enjoy the sport, boy, I think they really made a mistake over there of really exposing people, which is what makes this fun. I just wanted to show you a few things. So, as you know, I was a nurse and my background experience in occupational health and some of the involvement. And I know we've talked about this. And I know, folks, that some of the information is out there. And it's going to be a little harder for you folks who are just listening. But for those of you who can see, this is just going to be a very brief, quick overview. Anytime you put anything in front of your face, whether it's your hand, though that becomes contaminated, or a mask, this mask is called a surgical mask. The reason the surgeons would wear it is that when they put it on their face, it protects their coughing on anything that they're working on. And it just becomes the term surgical mask. If somebody was just to hold their hand in front of the surgeon's face, that would probably be almost just as good. But this is just to make the ease so that it protects them. However, the rest of your eyes, are still exposed to other people. Now, we all have heard the term of the nursing masks called the N95s. Now, here is an example of a 3M version of an N95. The N denotes that there's no protection against oils, fuels, chemicals when you touch them, get them on there. Well, in healthcare and or such, we're not in fabrication. We don't tend to get exposed to those kind of products. So the N denotes that there's no protection. There are ones out there called R resistant, P, those are totally protective, and they are also 9.5s. Now the 9.5 denotes that it protects and removes 95% of particles that are between 0.2 and 0.4. And folks, these are the viral ranges. It still allows air to come through, and the filters block everything out. So if you're not wearing a mask that does say 9.5 or higher, 9.9 or 100, you can have an N, a P, an R, a 9.5, a 9.9. So there's a multitude of combinations that can happen. But if you're wearing one of those, and if you're wearing it properly, or if you've been tested, whether it's qualitatively or quantitatively, and I won't get into that, but if you're wearing those properly, it protects the air that you breathe in, so it protects you, and then it also protects the air you breathe out. Whereas a surgical mask is just generally protecting the air you breathe out. So if you were to cough, and MIT did a great study that in a room where there's not air movement, if you were to cough, 6 feet is about average. 10 feet happens. A big sneeze, 26 feet that air can move. So a lot of times, folks, just anything you put on is going to help protect your sneezing, your coughing for the people beside you. Does it also protect you if they cough? Yes, because it's a physical barrier that hits it from hitting into your mouth or your nose, or for you breathing that in. So this is just a little bit of the quick. Here's just another N95. It's just a different version. They fit different faces differently, and that's the reason they've come up with so many different styles. There's different brands, different companies. And during the time when we used to see SARS and MERS that were happening, we'd see nurses wearing products like this. This is a product that is meant to protect your lungs. The difference with a product like this is the filters, and I mentioned there was that P filter. This means it removes 100% of the particles that are 0.2 to 0.4. And it's protected against oils, chemicals, fuels. So they do have ones that are not P, and they're just like the N95s. It's just like wearing those masks, but putting 2 of them. The difference, though, with this is where you exhale, it's not filtered. So you could be exposing somebody else. So that's when it comes around to the world of how do we protect ourselves? How do we protect others? I honestly think for the most part, if we were to do our job of, and we're leaning towards that, especially on airplanes now, we're starting to see if people are wearing a mask to just help you for when you cough or protect you from touching your own face, touching your own nose, because it's a reminder. I think we're going to be headed there for a little while. It almost seems like that because of our little bit of resurgence.
Yeah, and I think Djokovic will probably get one of those masks because of the humility.
I think you're absolutely right. I'm sure somebody's sending him a case right now. No, that's true. So one of the things too, Lawrence, let's talk about Stampede, because I know that's on all of our minds. Now, we can't change the idea, folks, that we're still physically distancing. What have you heard?
Well, I mean, I've heard that there's going to be food trucks now. You can go drive through mini donuts, and they're trying to, and pancakes. And it's all about food, right? Because
Yeah,
uh, at least that's something that they can offer now.
yeah.
You know, these rodeos that are sort of going on, and I've got invites to go, but no distancing rodeos and taking a chance. And these cowboys, we understand it's their livelihood. We know that's probably going to happen on these private ranches, but we always have to make sure that Stampede took a stand, and it was a very well thought out. They took a while to actually to think it up, and they made a very good decision in actually canceling this year. So we know that they're going to make attempts to actually create the normal for us on their view. So hopefully that happens in a very safe manner.
I agree. I think that it's important that people start, and I hope that they work on creating some of their events, but don't change the fact that, folks, it's okay. I'm never offended if I accidentally step too close to somebody and they take a step back. It's just a reminder. But I'm still actually going to any store and I'm still wearing a mask. It's still important to me. The that I'm still doing my part to try and, share that message. It's okay. I don't like wearing them all day long. Thank you to our nurses, our doctors, our healthcare workers. Thank you to those people. And I know if you're looking for a mask, and if you haven't heard that you could pretty much go, I think it's to 600 different um, fast food chains, they will provide you with a mask so that you have one for events that you may be attending, family events. I don't think anybody should be offended. And I never question anybody for what they consider is their developing choice of what their level of required protection is. I don't have a problem with it.
No, I mean, what do you hide your face? You hide your smile. I mean, so,
Yeah.
um, distance anyways. Well, be distant, but yeah, it's all about how you perceive people. Like when you see somebody wearing a mask, you automatically think, oh, they're sick, and
Yeah.
that's just, or oh, they're either wearing a mask, oh, because they're a little bit weak or whatever. There's that viewpoint too.
Actually, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Um, Originally it was sort of you weren't seeing people who were what they considered at risk out in the community as much. And I think he thought, oh, if they're wearing a mask, yeah, maybe they're an at-risk individual. Well, actually, it might just be for their own mental health, which is a challenge, as you mentioned, the mental health side of it.
I mean, I wear it because I'm just thoughtful. I don't want, I know that it's coming from our breath. It's coming from the way we talk, and so you're just being thoughtful for other people. That's all I wear it for. So.
And I'm comfortable, and I think that's an important message to share. It's not always, a lot of people are immediately thinking that somebody else wearing a mask is to protect them. No, sometimes they're just consciously thinking of other people and their mental health.
Yeah.
The um, Now I wanted to talk a little bit about the people who have been reaching out to us, who have been sending messages. Thank you to all of you. As you can usually see above me, there will be some drop downs that indicate you can always reach out to us at tsw@métis3.org. You can find us on our website at www.métis3.org. I know I often comment about the fact that Lawrence is always available for coffee and a conversation. And though that you might have to send him the coffee or have it delivered and you could have the conversation because the office is still closed. And I know that we all want things to go back to normal. But folks, I don't know what the new normal is. I don't know how long the new normal is going to take, but it will come faster if we all do our part. So that's something we have to think about. Um, Something I wanted to ask you about, Lawrence, was there's been a bit of conversation and I know in the business world that I'm in, what's happening with our youth because they're being challenged a little bit with all of a sudden a new lifestyle of not really being able to get out. School might be going online for a lot of them. Their social networks are being changed. I think we've always been very conscious of seniors and elders. Do you think our programs, and are you starting to see an upsurge in on that conversation with the province? Or I know federally there's some conversation, but what's happening so that we're starting to see our youth as in we're engaging them?
Well, youth have always been a vital conversation for any community. And I think we're looking at the mental health of these young people right now, because they they want the normal. The parents are telling them, no, 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 that's
Yeah.
not. And so, we have to worry about that because, it's the family dynamic that really lead to a lot of problems with a lot of young people, because when they feel barriers, they go out and they look to their friends for guidance, rather than their own family. So, if their friends aren't, in the right frame of mind, well, then that youth is going to, go out into different areas of life. Right. So, you have to be really cognizant of how you conduct yourself in a community like the Métis Nation is taking care of our young people. try to get them computers to function at home, try to get them the supports at home for especially for their parents, for their families. If there's, a lot of interruptions within, their what they do, for the extracurricular like sports or dance and all those things. Well, giving them support now is very, very vital. So
Mhm.
graduation, for instance, is a very precursor to that because now it's not normal for us to actually go present a sash to a young person right now. It's a little bit difficult. So, and that's the whole conversation is how do you support them distantly, but also look to programming in the future for them. So it's just the way it is.
Yeah, I know there's been talk about around our office that we're going to try and um, work on developing some more programs just to ensure that group understands just how important they are to our future and their engagement. If we continue to engage them now, and again, I make this comment all the time, when I saw that my father was becoming more engaged in the community, I realized at some point that's going to be important to me. And folks, I know if you're listening to this podcast, it's important to you, but as you continue to share that message, as you subscribe, as you mentioned to one of your, children, grandchildren, or their families saying, hey, here's a bunch of guys who are sharing a very positive message about the Métis community, and often will steer you in the direction of, for example, going to the provincial website of albertametis.com to get what's current and stay current both on what's COVID, what's happening within our province, and what's happening within our communities. We are going to get back to a norm, and I know I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, I definitely am. But it's just our life now. I mean, I spend a lot more time at home, which is great.
Yep.
I spend my children, which are fantastic, who had their preschool grad today, and like see all this, and not having to be on the road somewhere or in a hotel and trying to, FaceTime with them. But it's nice to actually be home with them.
Well, and I know I like having you closer. The couple things that I wanted to rant about. Now, I mentioned one of them is the sports thing. So this is sort of my usual, this kind of drives me crazy. It's not overwhelming. It's exhausting watching, the challenge every one of these pro sports is facing of trying to figure out how to start a camp, the relationships between the owners and the players, and what is everybody comfortable with in order to get started. If you had to choose a sport, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, that we had that's starting in a month from now and we actually could look forward to it, what is it going to be?
Well, number one, I'm a big Chuck Wagon fan.
That's okay. Very good. Good, good.
I'm a baseball fan. And baseball is a little bit different because it's not only what they're doing in the dugout, the dressing room, and all the travel, because there's a lot of players involved. And on the field, it's fine because they're distancing. It's all the interaction that happens. Chuck Wagon is a little different because it's all a little bit families and, you know, there's not a lot of connection.
Yeah.
But, we're missing that aspect. So, I follow CPCA, I follow WPCA, I follow, all those people down here and I do miss it. And even my family does because they're all Stampede and they're all Chuck Wagon people too. So, we're missing that sort of, it's a gap. Um, but we know sports has to happen. They can't live through um, a pandemic without giving us some entertainment, and they have to do it safely. UFC is doing quite well at it. They've only had a couple cases, um, but like for them, when they're sweating on each other and grappling with each other, but they're testing, they're doing all the right things, and it's going to be a little bit harder with hockey, baseball, NBA because there's so many people involved.
Yeah.
Not players but all the staff and keeping them, tested and all that stuff. So it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, especially because you hear about them building these virtual cities or let's call them virtual settlements for the athletes for their, and then trying to manage their families and their time and the time that they might need to rest. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But the other part of the rant that I wanted to make today was I wanted to say thank you. I read a fantastic article in the New York Times, which I tend to read quite frequently. And this one is the shout out to, and I very fortunate that I have good relationships at the university with deans and merituses and presidents and such, to say thank you to the scientists. What's been happening that's different is it used to be science moved at a rather safe, slow rate. But when pandemics or when incidents occur, the Spanish flu or polio, they tried to move more quickly. This is unprecedented. All of the schools, all of the science groups, all of the labs are sharing information so that we can work towards getting a vaccine, but there are so many hurdles. It's not just the development of the vaccine. It's going to be the delivery. It's going to be how does our body react to it? How do we measure that? How do we ensure that it's being delivered effectively? And what's the rate or what's the method that we're going to use for whether it's transmission or inoculation? And if I had read this correctly, they were talking about the mumps, and this gentleman's daughter had gotten sick with the mumps, and he was a scientist, and this was in the 50s. Well, they used her saliva, his daughter's saliva that had infection in it, and downgraded it, lowered the response and kept lowering it until they felt it was at a safe level before they could start providing this as a vaccine protection. 5 years. But this was at a time when science and the information wasn't able to be shared as easily. I mean, we're talking now that they're hoping, there's some countries that are talking within months. There's some countries that are saying they're willing to try something now. I think it's definitely a challenge, but I just want to say a shout out, thank you to all those scientists. Thank you to those people who are sharing this. This is going to expedite how science hopefully works in the future, especially when it comes to health.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's changes in the genomes and then they're studying and all this, and they're making sure that there's not going to be so many environmental factors. And when you're taking this new inoculation, right? If we don't know what will happen in 20, 30 years, what that's going to do to you,
No,
so we have to make sure that the scientists are, being funded, number one,
yeah,
but making sure that they're cognizant of what's going to happen once we're all vaccinated. So that's not a lot of people are probably going to rush into it. We know that for that reason. Um, be well prepared on how they verse everything in their research and how it's accepted in the community.
yeah. So a great big shout out to them. Big shout out to that you always take the time, Lawrence, for this conversation. And I know when it comes to you and I, timing is flawless. We never miss a beat. Our recordings always go off without a hitch. Well, that might not always be true, but the tonight worked out absolutely wonderful. Thank you again, always for your time. I know we're cutting her tight here. I just want to say thanks to our roaster Analog. Thank you for the traditional lands that we're on. Thank you to Mother Earth. Thank you to our families. Thank you to our friends. Thank you to the settlements. Thank you to our treaty nations. Thank you to all of those people who are out there still working or getting back and are staying active within our communities. We will get back to what we're going to find is the new norm, and we're going to make it through this. So thank you again, always to my co-host. Thank you to all of you out there in Radio Land who are listening to us and to our subscribers. Folks, I can't express it enough. We're continuing to develop and get better guests. No, sorry, that was a very poor chosen term. um, New guests all the time, and I can name our guests that have been so kind as Ward, Regan, and Joe. Thank you. We're going to see more guests that are attending because we have a lot more questions that we want to ask within our community. Continue to send us your information regarding your requests. Thank you for all the people who send in, and if you want to subscribe, thank you to going to our YouTube channel, The Squeaky Wheel. And if you're logged in, just hit the subscribe button and it'll keep you informed. Lawrence, close us out.
Well, I want to thank everybody for at least listening today, and viewing us. I know my hair's getting longer, so it was. And then I grew a beard a little bit too. It's a little bit patchy white, but that's just because I'm in my 40s and I'm a I don't know, aged machine, I guess you could say that, in producing hair. And hopefully we see each other in the future. That's the most important, and give each other big hugs and how we do that. So
Very Métis, and I definitely do look forward to that. So thank you, folks. Thank you for listening. And we're going to close out there. And we'll see you next week.